Did you think I was done? You thought I was done talking about Gladiator II with just one single video? Not a chance. I've got a lot more to say, my friend. Have a seat. Look, I've even got orange light in honor, Romulus, anyone? Everything bathed in orange light. I don't know what it is with Ridley Scott and orange, but he's light, but he's, yeah, that's, there we go. Orange, my friend. Hello, noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and if this is the first time you hear me talk about Gladiator II, then you missed out, because I've made already a video. Hold on a minute. And it's this one here. Gladiator 2 is a mess, historically speaking. You know, as a movie, you can still enjoy it. Be like, oh yeah, it was very nice, the music, whatever. But I'm talking history here. So Gladiator 2 is a mess, all historical and actually exposed. But you know, it wasn't all. It was not all. But yeah, if you haven't watched this video, please pause this one, go check it out, link in the description, link in the pinned comment, links everywhere. Do go watch it because that one is a deep historical analysis. But today, there are still a few things that I want to tell you about Gladiator 2. First and foremost, I would like to talk about this idea that we see presented again, and I say again because it also happened on Gladiator 1, the marking with fire of gladiators. So once you become a gladiator, then they take a really hot piece of iron and that's what they do to mark, then that everyone knows you're a gladiator now. So that happened on the first one, and it's happening on this one. You know when it didn't happen? In ancient Rome. Romulus. Okay, so it's a myth, but where does this myth come from? Well, this myth comes from a incorrect, and I want to say a little bit forced interpretation of what is called the sacramentum of gladiators, which is mentioned in Petronius. And translated into freedom speech, it means I swear to let myself be burnt, bonded, punished, and killed with fire. Now, the way this should be interpreted, however, is more of a reference to combat rather than an actual mark that would denote you as a gladiator. There is no reason to believe that. But we do know that the practice did happen. The only thing is that it happened with slaves that were running away. So if you were a slave or some sort of criminal sometimes, depending, although at the end of the day, if a slave tries to run away, it's considered robbery because he is stealing himself from his owner. So that's how they saw it at a legal level. And so slaves oftentimes would be marked so that people could see, oh, this is a slave, and he tried to run away. Unfortunately, this was erroneously connected to gladiators instead, and here we are. Hollywood movie, twice, Mr. Romulus, twice, and now everyone thinks, oh my gosh, gladiators were marked with fire and iron. No. The second thing that I sort of omitted from my script in the first episode of this series, I suppose, is the idea of how the Praetorian Guard is represented. So Praetorians are, of course, a very deep topic, the sort of elite warriors that sometimes also function as bodyguards for the emperor, and other times they murder them in cold blood. But I mean, hey, nobody's perfect. Anyhow, Praetorians are a very interesting topic, and I do want to make a dedicated video on all the details we have about the Praetorian Guard. But definitely one thing we do not have is any mention that the Praetorians were wearing black armor. I don't know what it is. Actually, scratch that, I do know what it is. I think the reason why Praetorians are oftentimes represented with this black armor is probably one, of course, to distinguish them for the audience, because for some reasons a lot of these movie directors think that the audience is really, really dumb. I mean, literally, like if you don't see two completely different colors, you don't know which legion is which, I suppose. I don't know, but I think that that's one way to distinguish it from the legion that was stationed outside in Ostia or Anzio, I think it was in Ostia, which is then the legion that goes to to serve the Prince of Rome, Lucius, as opposed to the legion that was instead still under the command initially of the emperors, or should I say emperor, because by now, spoilers by the way, by now Geta has already been murdered by Caracalla, so in theory they're under the command of Caracalla, but then Caracalla gets murdered as well, and so now they're under the command of Macrinus, who doesn't use them for some reasons and decides to take on a full-on former soldier turned gladiator, professional fighter in hand-to-hand combat in a river, what have you. And so their armor looks black so that you can distinguish them, I suppose. But there is also another reason, and that is that it's in fact something that comes from the movies in the 60s and the 70s. Now, given sometimes some of the movies from like the old times are actually good. If you look at the original Alexander the Great, if you look at how Ivanhoe was represented, I mean, even the original movie that actually shows the Battle of Agincourt, those are pretty good. The armor is actually much better than what we see oftentimes in modern cinema. But when it comes to Praetorians, that's just something that they had. Even back in the day, Praetorians are always wearing this black armor. And I think the reason, it's false, it's not true. Praetorians would just wear, yeah, sure, high quality armor, I suppose. Some Praetorians could even have more exotic and expensive suits of armor, such as lorica squamata scale, or even plumbata, so scales attached on top of mail. Maybe like a Praetorian prefect could wear musculata. But in general, Praetorians would just have armor. They didn't have it of a specific color, let alone black, which would be quite expensive to make anyways. But I think that comes from the idea that oftentimes Praetorians had a little bit of a sinister reputation, so to speak. And therefore, this black armor makes them look like the bad guys, the villains, and I think that just stuck. But do keep in mind, the real Praetorians were not wearing black. And also, the fact that in this movie specifically, you have even these archer Praetorians, so I suppose Praetorian Sagittari, that start shooting on the crowd for whatever reason. They have these purple crests, where purple was excruciatingly expensive. It was something that only an emperor or a legatus, like a high-end general, could afford. That is because in order to produce that, because remember, in classical antiquity, it's not like you have got chemical substances or artificial colors. In the majority of the cases, colors are linked to the sort of natural products, constituents, ingredients that you find in nature, and therefore they are also region specific. Now, in order to create that type of hue of purple, violet if you will, what you would need is to crush over 10,000 seashells that were coming specifically from a geographic area just to make a tunic. So yeah, I doubt that just a random archer could wear purple because it couldn't be mass produced. Another thing that I wanted to mention is this idea of this legion that is waiting sort of outside of Rome. The same legion that then Lucius will try to claim in order to fight against Macrinus's machinations. Now, you may have heard of this, but generally speaking, legions in ancient Rome were not allowed to get that close to Rome. In fact, there is a very famous rule which says that no legion is allowed to go south of the Rubicon River, which would be modern-day Emilia-Romagna, so the north of Italy, kind of north of Tuscany. And this was a sort of line, if you will, that could not be transpassed by any Roman legion, exception being some very special circumstances. And the reason for this rule was because, well, they didn't want generals, which were very popular with their soldiers and legionaries, to be able to just enter Rome and with a pretext to just say, hey, now Rome is mine and I call myself the emperor. And so, for that reason, legions were not allowed to do that. But there are exceptions. And I believe that in this movie, in this case, we do have one of those, which is triumphant moments. So do remember that this legion, before it actually started to be, it was claimed by Lucius, it actually belonged to the general, Mr. Pascal. And of course, he has just won Numidia, which of course is out of place, as I mentioned in my original video, link in the description below, because that battle and the claiming of Numidia would have only happened 300 years before, in 105 BC, so that is completely out of place. But let's pretend for a moment that we are in an alternative universe, and in this universe, not only you've got xenomorphs, but you've also got free Numidia, for whatever reason. So he won, he conquered it, so now he's going back to Rome for his triumph, and that was one of those exceptions in which a general could bring a legion close to Rome. That's why, in this case, I think it's not wrong for the legion to be stationed near the capital. One thing that it really annoys me, and it just happens, I'm like persecuted, it's my nemesis, leather bracelets. Like, I don't know, I mentioned it so many times, and they piss me off, because you look at iconography, nowhere do we see these freaking leather bracelets everywhere. But unfortunately, not only in all sorts of movie productions, whenever there is an ancient Roman or an ancient Greek, they have just gotta have it. And it's so funny because it transcends class, social status. Emperors, leather bracelets. Generals, leather bracelets. Consuls, proconsuls, leather bracelets. Priests, leather bracelets. The regular population, every single Roman. I wonder if they give them out for free. Is that how it works? It's like every morning you get a little thing of bread and then you get your leather bracelet allowance, because these people, it's like no one, men, women, it's like unisex, children, everyone. I wonder if dogs are gonna start wearing leather bracelets in this world. Imagine the monumental amount of leather, like all those poor animals, all that animal skin being used. I mean, how did they even have any leather left for buckles and anything that they needed for, what have you? A canteen, a little pouch. No, sorry. All the leather in the entirety of the Republic and the Empire was used to give it to the entirety of the population. And what's funny is that in Gladiator II, of course, we've got leather bracelets everywhere. Literally everyone. I think that Ridley Scott was wearing leather bracelets as he was behind the thing, when they sit on their little Hollywood thing. I know he had leather bracelets. Yet the entirety of the crew, even the cameramen, everyone had to have leather bracelets. And what's funny is that in Gladiator II, even the Numidians have leather bracelets, the gladiators have leather bracelets. It's it doesn't matter. Now, it's not just a matter of the entirety of the population of ancient Greece and ancient Rome had leather bracelets, which already, no, it's the entire population of the planet, regardless of culture, regardless of nationality, regardless of customs, regardless of what have you. They all, from the Stone Age to the medieval period, everyone. You'll notice that there is no leather bracelets. Next, I would like to talk about a little bit these two sets of armor that we see here. Now, clearly, the armor that we see worn by the protagonist, Hanno, Lucius, whatever you want to call him, it looks a little bit like what I would consider to be a spolas, although then again, unfortunately, it's made of that same sort of kind of cheap leather that we often see in Hollywood productions that makes it look more like a jerkin than an actual set of armor. But I'm not too mad about that, because at least they did the humeralia, so these shoulder reinforcements that were very common in the entirety of the Mediterranean basin, from ancient Greece to ancient Rome, of course. Interestingly enough, in the movie, when it comes to the lorica hamatae, so the sort of mail shirts of mail, so-called chainmail sometimes, worn by the Roman soldiers, they did the humeralia right, but the connector, I couldn't find a picture unfortunately, but believe me, the connecting hooks, they are supposed to be one way and they did them the other way around, so everything is connected the wrong way. But at least this one seems to be connected correctly. The only problem that I have with this suit of armor is that he's wearing it on his bare chest. Now I get it, it makes it look like a macho man, and you can see a little bit of his pecs, I suppose, but that's not something that any warrior in any era would have done. You always want to have some fabric between your armor and your body, because otherwise the chafing, yeah, good luck with Nivea. You're gonna need a Tiber full of Nivea in order to, help with that. So, he should be wearing at least something. Now, seeing his naked arms is fine. The Greeks did that. The Romans do that. But he should have at least something underneath. Now, when it comes to ancient Roman soldiers, they would have something that modernly we refer to as subarmalis, but in period it was probably called thoracomachus, which is actually a little bit of a padded garment. So it does have a little bit of thickness. It's not just fabric, and it's worn on top of the tunic. So remember, Roman soldier is wearing one tunic, in winter 2, then the subarmalis or thoracomachus, and then on top of that they will be wearing their mail armor or their lorica segmentata or the iron banded armor. 2 or 3 layers sometimes between the bare skin and the armor. Whatever the armor be made of. With metal, yes, but even with something that is leather or something that is linen, like the linothorax, you still want something, at least on the torso, between the armor and the actual skin. But let's talk about his armor. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to painted armor like that, we cannot be 100% sure. It is possible that they painted some of the musculata. It's not completely impossible. It is also possible that you just left it polished bronze or whatever metal that they were using. The only only thing that I'm saying here is that this looks gorgeous. The connection, the sort of contrast between gold and white is something I absolutely adore. And in fact, it always makes me think of the human faction in Heroes of Might and Magic for whatever reason. Maybe because of the angels. Still, I'm not so sure that this would be easy to make because white and black were quite complicated. They could do it, but they were quite complicated to achieve, particularly on metal like this. White was done, absolutely. It's a color that we see all over the place, particularly in Greece. When it comes to structures and buildings, it is what it is. But since we are talking about colors or the lack thereof is in fact something that I, in this case, forgot to talk about in the previous episode, which is the fact that apart from a little bit of red on the Colosseum, just at the top section of the columns, there are no colors. Everything looks bare bone. The columns are white, the temples are white, the statues are white, and that's wrong. Now we know for a fact that the ancient Romans did have polychromy, both in statuary, in art, but also in their architecture. So in order to represent a good, historically accurate period visualization of ancient Rome / ancient Greece, the temples should all be in bright colors, reds, whites, and blues. The statues should be painted in the original color. So all marble and stone-based statues should be in full color. We have so much leftover pigment to prove this point. We also have art, murals, and depictions that show us the moment in which a sculptor would start painting a statue from period. And we even see that sometimes when you look at, for example, one of the walls that are painted in Pompeii, we see that the statues, whenever we see them, they are in color in the paintings because that was the norm. They were lifelike rather than being completely white. Now, don't get me wrong, I do enjoy the looks of white statuary. I think it is beautiful. But if you wanted to look like Rome, I think that this was a fantastic opportunity considering the massive budget of freaking 300 million, I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. But even if it is 300 million, I mean, at the end of the day, they probably used 299 million just to cast Denzel Washington. Regardless, I think they could have put a little bit of that towards showing what ancient Rome actually looked like, rather than playing to these stereotypes that at the end of the day, I get it that that's what people expect, but wouldn't it be nice to surprise people and also the likes of me and show Rome for what it would have actually looked like? I think it's a massively wasted opportunity to really show the beauty of the classical world and the Mediterranean world. Another small thing that I wanted to say is, do you remember that when a certain character, I'm not going to spoil that, but after a certain important character that people really like dies and gets transformed into Hellraiser with arrows, people riot, and we see they go nuts, not only in the arena, but they also outside in the streets. There is a full-on rebellion. It's like some sort of riot, if you will. Now, did a riot occur under Caracalla and Geta due to a popular person being executed in the arena? Not that we could find. Also because, just for context, the majority of riots like this did not happen because someone they liked got murdered in the arena, but mostly they happened due to hunger. So when people were really hungry under whatever emperor or even the republic, yeah, they would riot. And if you think about it, it does make logical sense. At the end of the day, one of the reasons why people don't rebel even when they are under despotic or tyrannical governments is because, yeah, sure, I liked that guy that you just had murdered and I'm really, really pissed. And I think that you, emperor, are a monster. Still, it's not worth me protesting. It's not worth getting an arrow to the knee. No, I mean an arrow to the chest or getting stabbed or thrown into a prison. I can stay mad, I can complain, but to rebel, you really need desperation. And when people can't feed themselves, when people are hungry, when people see that maybe members of their family are dying and then they see the emperor being dressed in gold, that is a situation that people will go absolutely towards the business end of a blade or an arrowhead because they're desperate. And of course, if enough people do it, then we do know that sometimes rebellions do work and sometimes you get a coup. But you do need a very deep level of desperation before you actually challenge an emperor, particularly in classical antiquity. Now, since we are focusing a little bit on Mr. Pascal with this episode, did he exist? Is he a real historical character? Because we did mention in the previous episode that Lucius did exist. I mean, not exactly in this shape, of course, but he did exist. He's loosely based. But Pascal? Well, his character is General Accius, we are told. But I think that his name is, first of all, he didn't exist, but I think that his name is a little bit of an unfortunate choice. And the reason for that is that we do have a specific gens, so the gentes are the patrician families in Rome, right? And we do have a gent with a very similar name, namely gens Achaia. However, the problem is that, once again, we are in the presence of something anachronistic. This specific type of patrician family did not exist in Imperial Rome, and in fact it will only exist during the Byzantine period. So it is a name of Greek origin that was much, much later, after the Western Roman Empire had already fallen. In fact, as far as we know, the name could be translated as the not evil or the good one. And for what I remember, the only one that would have any historical relevancy, member of this family that we do remember of, had some ecclesiastical connotations, so completely out of place. Now, as I mentioned, people get mad, and some of these weird Praetorian archers, they pull the bow and hold it like this as they point and threaten the crowd. That's something that didn't happen. People just didn't do it. And I believe it's something that we oftentimes see in fantasy movies, medieval movies, this idea of, even with war bows such as, never mind classical antiquity, but I've seen people in movies holding bows that look like a full poundage long bow, just holding it like this, and then they talk. The level of strength that you need in order to pull it all the way to where it's supposed to be pulled, because for medieval bows, you're supposed to be able to pull all the way back to your ear. This is how you gain enough power to be militarily acceptable in, say, 14th century, 15th century Europe. But in general, holding it for a very long period of time is extremely draining, and it requires a lot of strength. I don't think I could pull a medieval longbow, to be honest with you. But I think that this idea of keeping it in tension as you threaten people, it's just sort of a modernism, because we're really applying what you would do with firearms. Because with firearms, you can do it. And in fact, the only weapon that I could see this make any sense would be the crossbow, because the crossbow is self-tensing. Once you do load it, it stays that way. And then you can point it at someone if you want to be threatening. But with bows and arrows, every time I see that, I'm not saying that it will never happen in the history of mankind, because making a statement like that usually is a recipe for failure, because you will have the one time when it did happen for whatever reason with a small poundage bow in a very peculiar situation. But I want to say it's just a little bit of out of context. Not to mention that, as far as we know, the Praetorian Guard did not have any archer corps, as far as I know, so that's completely made up. Anyhow, after all of this, thank you very much for watching. But if you do have more questions, like, but what about the sharks? What about the actual naumachia, so the flooding of the amphitheater and the Colosseums? Did the Roman do that? If you want to know more about the actual chronology, do refer to the main episode of this video series, and you'll find a link together with the leather bracelet below. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow, noble ones. Aliens. To a friend of mine the other day. We were playing For Honor, great game by the way. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much.